Hey there, it is Rachel. And as the school year is beginning, I'm talking to a lot of families about the structure they want to create this year, about the rules that they want to enforce. And of course, whenever there's a conversation about rules, there's a conversation about consequences. So I did talk about in this week's podcast episode, how to find an effective consequence. But in this video, I want to give you another tip. And that tip is very simply, let consequences speak for themselves. Because usually what happens is we create a consequence. So maybe you say to your child, if you don't get your schoolwork done, you can't have screen time later. And then what happens is they don't get their homework done, and then you may enforce this consequence. But what we usually do in addition to enforcing this consequence is we also bring a lot of negativity on top of enforcing the consequence. So maybe we say something like, well, you should have done your homework and then you'd be able to have screen time right now. Or maybe we get cold. Maybe our child is upset because they're not having screen time and we say, well, you knew what the consequence was. Or maybe we spend a lot of energy lecturing them and telling them why they should do the right thing because then in the future they won't have this consequence. All of that is going to actually reduce the effectiveness of the consequence itself. Because here's what happens. If you just let the consequence happen, your child is likely to learn from it, especially if you are enforcing this consequence consistently. But when you start to impose the negativity and the lectures on top of it, your child is actually going to focus more on how they feel about you and how annoyed they are and frustrated they are with you than on learning from the consequence. And there's a reason for that. As human beings, we are survival-based creatures. So our brain is going to notice when someone is coming at us with negativity. It's actually uncomfortable. It's a threat to us. That's what our brain will focus on. So again, your child is going to focus more on you and your negativity and that they don't want to hear what you're saying right now than on thinking about the consequence that you are trying to impose. So I want to give you another example of what I mean by this. And this example, very honestly, will relate more to pre-COVID days, but I think you'll get the idea of what I'm talking about. So let's say your child is at school and they're sick. You get a call to pick them up because they're sick. And you're really, anxious to get there to get them. So you're speeding and you get pulled over by a police officer. And you start to explain to the police officer, well, I'm sorry, my child is sick. And the police officer says, I don't really care that your child is sick. You broke the law. I don't want to hear your excuses. And they're very negative. If you're telling your friend about this later, very likely you're going to start the story with, you won't believe this police officer, because that's what you're going to focus on. But let's say you're in the same scenario, you're going really quickly to pick up your child, a police officer pulls you over and you say, I'm really sorry, my child is sick, I'm going to get them. And the police officer says, yeah, I know, I'm a parent too, I get it, I still have to give you the ticket, you broke the law, but I totally understand. In that case, when you're telling your friend this story later about what happened, you're actually likely to start with, guess what? I was going to get my child and I got a ticket. We will notice the thing that is the most negative. And when we impose this negativity on top of those consequences, that's what kids are going to focus on. So again, I just want to reiterate that the key is to let the consequences speak for themselves. So enforce the consequence, enforce it consistently. Just enforce it without so many words, without so much negativity, and without so much lecturing. Now, if you do want more information about how to find a consequence that does work, you can check out this week's podcast episode. You can find it on my website, rachel-bailey.com/49. You can also find it on any podcast app. Just check out my podcast, Your Parenting Long Game, and you will see episode 49 there as well. All right, have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next week.